Good evening. My name is Sarah Gill and I am here to discuss the current situation in regards to the Cape Town water crisis and the media coverage in relation to it done locally in South Africa by the SABC and abroad in Britain by the BBC and America by CNN. The Cape Town water crisis is a devastating lack of water in the major city of Cape Town, with a threat of day zero or running completely out of fresh water looming over citizens' heads. This would be the first major world city to run out of water, something that has been an issue already in other developing countries, as well as in the American city of Flint, Michigan. This threat has been present for the past 3 years, as the Western Cape has been one of the worst droughts to date in the nation's history, but recent events have made the issue much more pressing, creating a national crisis and consequently causing heavy water restrictions on locals, including that of a consumption of less than 50 liters a day, to postpone day zero even further, hopefully until June 4th. But we must keep in mind that South Africa was already a water-scarce country, as the average rainfall has been half the world average, and they have had a history of terrible droughts and have refused aid from Israel in the regards of water desalination due to the opposition of Israel's lack of initiative in creating and securing a lasting peace with Palestine. So it's much more political when you look a little bit deeper. All of this in mind, one must also consider that South Africa is one of the largest countries and most developed economies in the continent. It is also a major media player in the region, with both state-owned and private broadcasting companies, including that of the SABC, or the South African Broadcasting Company, one that is comparable to that of the BBC. The press and broadcasting groups are diverse and dynamic, which reflects and represents the population fairly well, as there are 11 national languages, and as the population is comprised of people from many different cultural and ethnic backgrounds. Moving on, politically, as of late, there has been some unrest as the incumbent president, Jacob Zuma, resigned back in January after facing massive corruption charges, ones that have been rumored for years. Consequently, in February, Cyril Ramaphosa was elected as the new president after a vote by the ANC, or the African National Congress. Feelings are mixed among voters and nationals alike, and government policy and further research into political corruption could have had an effect on the water crisis as a whole. While conducting research for this video, I was interested to see how each news outlet framed the story of the water crisis, in the frequency of the coverage, and how it was portrayed by the SABC, the BBC, and CNN through agenda setting and framing. For my methodology, I reviewed a total of 10 sources, 4 articles from the SABC in South Africa, 5 from the BBC in Britain, and 1 from CNN in America. All are the leading news outlets in their respective countries and are all respected as being credible and noteworthy. In my analysis of the news articles that I selected, I found that the framing of the news stories differed depending on the news outlet. And according to Karen Callan and Frank Schnell, framing is a way of selecting certain ideas, events, or issues and making them connect in ways that they would not originally connect to produce an intended thought process in the observer. With that in mind, another question then arose. If this whole situation is being treated as a real crisis by the media, and if so, what is the motivation behind it? This could practically be measured in the frequency in which the story was being discussed, and the manner in which the information was displayed for the audience, which would then be related to the idea of media dependency theory, which means that what we think about events and what we believe is true or false is shaped by how the media portrays them. As I continued my research, I found that the articles produced and published by the SABC were much more factually based and were rooted in creating community awareness and an emphasis on how and why the crisis was happening and how to be more proactive as a citizen in regards to water conservation and other avenues of aid. The SABC also had many more frequent publications that were shorter in length. I believe in part because it was a local news and it pertained more closely to South Africans as a whole than to just the global economy. When examining articles from the BBC, I found that the article titles were much more catching and attention-grabbing, and that the body followed the same pattern as coverage was more based on human interest pieces than factual news coverage. Articles were more focused on the daily lives of individuals living in Cape Town and the peculiar ways in which they conserved water. And then, in the conclusion, they brought it around to a more all-encompassing statement in an effort to relate to those that wouldn't care so much about South Africa innately. Articles were fairly frequent, but much longer in length, with a focus on entertaining information with facts sprinkled in, most in an effort to build credibility and to educate as a secondary function. Finally, onto CNN, I noticed that the articles were much less frequent in publications, but those that were published packed a punch with various information, but all in an order to grab their audience's attention. The article by CNN was all-encompassing, almost like a Spark Notes, with all the information needed to understand the crisis, the different factors related to the cause of the crisis, and the possible repercussions involved with the lack of fresh drinking water. In conclusion, I found that through my research that there was an emphasis on the fact that the Cape Town water crisis is a national problem in South Africa, and that it would be detrimental to both the economy and the environment. Although these ideas were apparent in all of the articles that I've researched, I noticed that the ones written by foreign news agencies focus much more heavily on these ideas were apparent in all of the articles that I researched. I noticed that the ones that were written by foreign news agencies focus much more heavily on how detrimental the effects would be on a global scale, and how interesting and entertaining it was to read about these horrific conditions, but not to subject oneself to living in the day-to-day life. The framing also made it seem that Cape Town and the water crisis as a whole were a warning of what is to come if we as a whole planet are not careful or mindful when it comes to water consumption. Alternatively, I found that the SABC treated the crisis much more seriously, as it had a direct effect on the people of South Africa than those separated geographically. Information was much more direct and frequent, and the framing spoke more on how to be proactive and helpful. The framing spoke more on how to be proactive and helpful in a national emergency, and how to navigate through all of the incoming information, especially in light of all of the changes that have been happening politically. These articles showcased how the nuances in framing can alter very similar information to communicate vastly different ideas on the same subject. Moving forward, this would be a lesson in being mindful of the media that one consumes, and to be aware that not one story will encompass all of the elements related to an event. This research is a reminder to think critically about the information that is presented to us.